Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. Just over a week ago, I posted a video about a witch doctor performing a backyard circumcision on a teenage boy, and how it went horribly wrong. Well, a good friend of mine has brought to my attention yet another similar story, this time not in suburban Melbourne, but in the Northern Territory. Anger in Northern Territory community, after circumcision rite ends with 3 boys airlifted to hospital. There is still anger in a remote Northern Territory community after 3 teenage boys had to be medically evacuated following an Indigenous initiation ceremony which went horribly wrong. The boys were part of a group of about 20 who were circumcised 2 days before Christmas near the small Gulf of Carpentaria town of Borroloola, 700 kilometers east of Darwin. They were so badly cut during the procedure that they had to be taken to Darwin for urgent treatment. Local ambulance driver William Miller arrived at the ceremony to find his 17-year-old grandson Bryce severely injured. "I took one look at him and he was sitting in a pool of blood. And that really hurt me, that did," he said. "I wasn't happy at all, with the whole people who done the job." Bryce Miller, who had to be airlifted to hospital, had pushed his grandfather to allow him to participate in the ceremony. "When I got cut, and I seen the blood squirting through on the wrong side, it was bad. Squirting out bad. Heaps. And losing a lot of blood," he said. The ABC understands instruments from the local health clinic were used in the ceremony and have regularly been supplied in the past, in line with health department guidelines. Nurses and doctors from the clinic have also attended previous ceremonies, but were not present at last December's ritual. Some of the clinic's health professionals have told the ABC they were appalled by the injuries they saw, but none is willing to speak publicly for fear of dismissal. Investigators say injuries do not constitute child abuse. The Northern Territory government says it is aware of the case, and so far its investigators have found the injuries do not constitute child abuse. The Anti-Child Abuse Task Force received 2 notifications about the incident, leading to an investigation by 2 police officers and the Department of Children and Families. But their inquiries found that the children had not been harmed as defined by the Care and Protection of Children Act. The department said it would continue to conduct inquiries into the well-being of the young men. Attorney General John Elfrink said any suggestion of child abuse was taken very seriously. A more fulsome investigation was done in this instance because of the sensitivities involved, he said. No abuse was found to have occurred, and in the absence of that and in the absence of criminality, it's a parental decision on how to bring up the kids. Mr. Elfrink says he has lived and worked in remote communities and understands how traditional practices occur, but he believes there should always be checks for child abuse. There are a number of cultures that operate in the NT and even more Australia-wide: Islamic cultures, Christian cultures, Aboriginal cultures, other religions and other cultural practices, he said. So long as those practices don't amount to child abuse, there is no role for the state. So long as those practices don't amount to criminality, there is no role of the state. It's called a free country. Elders say ceremony a critical cultural step for young men. The circumcision ceremony dates back thousands of years and is common practice in traditional and remote communities across northern Australia. Elders say the ceremony is a critical cultural step where boys become men. The elders who supervised the circumcision said the injuries were likely caused by a visiting family member who is still learning the ritual. "I think some place he make mistake, some place he don't, you know," said traditional Garawa elder Keith Rory. Mr. Rory said he had been conducting the ritual for 20 years. "This ceremony is really strong. It goes back, way back to the old days when it first started," he said. "People use different sort of stuff with young men. These days we get it from the clinic, but in those days they used stone and stuff. They made it themselves. It is traditional stuff and it's sacred stuff." Borroloola's former doctor, Dr. Peter Fitzpatrick, says it is not the first time young men have needed medical care after initiation. "They're doing lots of young men and it's a remote area and I have seen an evacuated young men myself," he said. Dr. Fitzpatrick, whose own sons have been initiated, says with any surgical procedure there are sometimes complications. These events occur in remote areas. They're not actually occurring within CUI of an A&E department, and people live in remote areas. That increases the risk, he said. "The ceremony is very, very important to Indigenous communities. As long as there's some procedures and understanding and harm minimization is there, then it's maybe at an acceptable level to the community. Injured teenager has no regrets over ritual. Bryce Miller has recovered from his injuries and says he has no regrets participating in this initiation into manhood. His grandfather William, on the other hand, says no other family members will ever take part again. Others in the community, including Garawa man Gadrian Hussein, say the ceremony will continue. There's no point talking about our ceremony because that's not going to stop us from carrying that culture, he said. We're going to carry it on. While doing research for this video, I came across another similar story from a few years ago. Aboriginal circumcision ceremony marred by alcohol. 3 teenage Aboriginal boys turned up in the grounds of the Bush Hospital on December 30th. They stood outside with blood pouring down their legs. They were too embarrassed to go inside, fearing they would encounter a female nurse or doctor. They had just been through a circumcision ceremony in a camp outside Tennant Creek, 500 kilometers north of Alice Springs. It had gone badly wrong. The boys, who had received no anesthetic, were left mutilated by elders who it is suspected were drinking when they performed the initiation ritual. The Northern Territory Health Department confirmed the boys had presented with severe lacerations but refused to give the ages of the teenagers. The Courier Mail understands the boys were 16 or under, which should have prompted the hospital to report the incident to police as a possible case of child abuse. Police were not told. The boys spent 3 nights in hospital before being released back into the community. The bungled circumcisions have only now come to light because a woman, the wife of a cattle station manager, had been at the hospital with a sick child. The woman had let her 2 children play just outside the hospital's doors while awaiting a doctor. The kids started throwing pebbles at each other. Then it was noticed the rocks were covered in congealed blood. Hospital staff cleaned up the children and tested the blood on the children for disease. The woman called on the Territory Health Department to investigate the matter out of concern for her children's health and the nature of these circumcisions. In the right circumstances, circumcision ceremonies are carefully controlled. Women sing goodbye to their boys throughout the night and then depart to let the men perform the cutting, after which the boys emerge as men. But Tennant Creek, a largely indigenous town, is awash with alcohol. There are concerns as well that young men are being snatched by elders and forced to go through the procedure against their will. One witness who declined to be named said on the morning the 3 boys presented in hospital, he had seen a young man running for his life through the streets of Tennant Creek. This young fella escaped and took off and was running through town, said the witness. This painted-up bloke was racing after him and a Toyota was cruising around looking for the boy as well. I think they grabbed him. I'm not sure if he was one of the 3 who were mutilated. Jeff Warner, director of Tennant Creek's Anti-Ingenie Health Aboriginal Corporation, said the circumcisions took place in a makeshift bush camp out of Tennant Creek. Speaking to people around town, they're saying it's common knowledge that there was alcohol in the camp at the time, he said. Mr. Warner said he had worked in remote communities where elders had the backup of health services, who provided circumcision kits, including sterilized cutting implements. Boys got follow-up treatment, such as tetanus jabs. Mr. Warner said he believed the Tennant Creek elders had obtained sterilized tools for the ceremonies but took no other precautions. A senior Alice Springs doctor said he had heard of one-off cases of botched circumcisions but 3 in one go was telling. This sounds like alcohol-related rubbish, he said. I respect the rights of others to practice their culture, but those rights should not be allowed to break laws or harm others. In the West, female circumcision is outlawed. We understand that it is wrong and harmful. We do not give it a free pass based on culture or religion. But for some reason when it comes to male circumcision it's a different story. I view circumcision performed in a hospital, by a doctor, under ideal conditions, to be a violation of the child's human rights, not to mention unnecessary and dangerous. But to have it done by people with no medical training, in a non-sterile environment, essentially a backyard job, is really beyond words. I really do not give a shit if your tradition of circumcision is less than 200 years old, as in the case of the West, thousands of years old, as in the case of the Jews, or tens of thousands of years old, as in the case of indigenous Australians. It's time to end this unnecessary barbaric act. Cultures and traditions change. This is a clear example of one that needs to